of the proposals I've seen in Wisconsin is called Learn Fair.
That's good. Let's speak to
And the circumstance is this. The attitude is we don't want another generation of welfare. And we know it's going to happen if a child doesn't get a decent education. You worked your way through school and you got a doctorate degree and you stood on your own 2 feet. You probably had to do a lot of individual work to get there. Everybody's got that opportunity in this country. Sometimes they need the light shown at the end of the tunnel where it's there. And I believe the Republican Party says, let's give an opportunity, but let's not give a lifetime of assistance that some people perceive to be just bondage. And in my opinion, things like Learn Fair could do that. In that circumstance, a person who's receiving aid to dependent children, if their child drops out of school, they lose that aid. They're saying, take responsibility for your child and make them stay in school so they'll have this chance. And if those type of circumstances could be put into place all over this country, I think you would see a change. People have to take responsibility for their own lives at some point in time. The only way that's going to happen is ultimately you take away that money that's coming to them every month. That doesn't have to happen the next week or next month, but it ultimately has to happen.
That could be a gradual phasing in, phasing out. But to make sure that there are jobs at the other end of that phasing out. Is that what we're saying?
And jobs will come with training.
Excuse me.
Education has to be a centerpiece.
You know, excuse me, Mr. Richardson, we've got about 5 minutes. Excuse me. And what we'd like to do here, again, is to give you an opportunity, as we said before. Ms. Eskins will be with us next week, and she will have an opportunity, and we will talk to her essentially about the same thing that we're talking to you about, to give you an opportunity to sort of summarize your candidates. I mean, we've got 5 minutes, and quite a bit has been said. TV announcements and advertisements and millions of dollars have been spent and et cetera. But now, hopefully, this will be shown, as we said, a couple of mornings before the election, and this will also give our viewers an opportunity to make that assessment as to your candidates. And so for the next 4 minutes, let's talk about the Republicans in the state of Tennessee.
Well, very briefly, one candidate I didn't get to mention is Rod DeBerry, a bright, young, attractive African-American down in Memphis who's a Republican who's taken on Harold Ford for Congress. Created a lot of excitement. The state and the National Republican Party are trying to help Rod. We're trying to help him and also make a statement that we're open to everyone. It's time that the Republican Party has open doors to everyone, and we're trying to demonstrate that. To summarize where we are as a party, it is GOP stands for the Great Opportunity Party here in Tennessee this year. There's an opportunity for us to win. There's also an opportunity to define ourselves in a different way. We need not only to be out saying what the Democrats are doing that's wrong, we ought to be talking about what we're for, some of the things we've already talked about. The driving issue is Bill Clinton. If you like what Bill Clinton's done and what he's about, then you ought to vote for Jim Cooper, and you ought to vote for Jim Sasser, and you ought to vote for Phil Bredesen, because they're attached to him. You won't see them invite Bill Clinton to come to Tennessee. They're afraid to run with him. That ought to tell you something. They won't talk about him in Tennessee, but they vote with him in Washington. If you want to cut Bill Clinton's term in half, elect 2 Republican senators and elect a Republican governor who will make sure that the conservative aspect of government, which is less government, is implemented here in Tennessee. That's what we ought to be doing. Look at what Jim Sasser's going to be saying. He's going to be saying he's a conservative. He's going to be running against his own record. Jim Cooper, a fine fellow, who I believe is a very, very capable person with a lot of integrity, is also having to run against himself because he's voted with Bill Clinton 83% of the time. And I believe that becomes the issue. I know people don't want to talk about Bill Clinton when they talk about congressional and Senate races, and yet his policies are voted on by these folks. And his policies are what's changing America, and America doesn't like what they see.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes, and again, let me thank you and give you an opportunity to make some final comments, but let me thank you for, excuse me, coming by and giving us that information today, and to again remind our audience that next week, Ms. Jane Eskins, who is your counterpart in the Democratic Party, she's the chairperson of the Democratic Party, will be by and, excuse me, she will talk about her candidates and her campaign, just as you have talked about your candidates and your campaign. And the purpose of all of this is to simply give our audience an opportunity to have sort of an extended discussion in reference to the Republican Party and the issues that the Republican Party nationally as well as on the state level is standing on. And so that's the purpose. Now, about a last minute and 30 seconds, Mr. Richardson, before we end today.
Well, Dr. Haney, most of what I would say would just be repeating what I've got to say, but Tennesseans have got a choice. They can look at Washington and say, I like what I see, and I think we should continue that policy. If they do, they should vote for Jim Sasser, and they should vote for Jim Cooper, and they should vote for Phil Bredesen, and they should vote for these Democrat congressional candidates. If they do, they're going to get more of the same. Because, as you said, national Democrat figures are going to come here and campaign for them, and they're going to be obligated to their policies. They have another choice. They can say, we want less government in our lives. We don't want somebody who's got the attitude of, we know better than you, which is what Bill and Hillary Clinton have said to this country. They've got that choice. And they can look at first of all, I would say they'd have to look at the governor's race and say, here's where we start changing.
Okay.
That's first. Because if you want to start changing that, what happens in Tennessee starts at the governor's office, and Don Sundquist and what he believes in. Conservative government, less government. Then you can look at Fred Thompson's race. And that's the next one they should look at and say, do we want to replace Harlan Matthews, a do-nothing senator, who's going to vote with Bill Clinton every time, with Jim Cooper, who's going to vote with him every time, or Fred Thompson, who has lived a life bigger than bolder than the average American? Or do we want to replace him with Jim Sasser, with Bill Frist, who's going to vote against 18 years of failed Democrat policy?
And thank you, Mr. Richardson, for coming by and giving us that information this morning. And again, let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week.